Welcome to the Ricecast. I'm your host, Dan Pigsley. Sitting across from me is my friend and yours, Pastor Willy Rice. Pastor, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Good. You have a good weekend?
I did. Absolutely. Beautiful time of year here in Florida.
It is. Woke up Sunday morning, walked outside. I almost put my heat heater on.
Yeah.
Almost. It was 67 degrees.
October's kind of, I told somebody, this is the beginning of the time of year we brag about the weather, and we're bad to do that, but it's okay. So about the next 7-8 months, we just really can boast about it, and I wouldn't trade it for anybody.
Yeah.
So October looks beautiful here. It feels great, and we don't have the leaves changing, but other than that, it's a beautiful time of year.
I love the leaves don't change. I don't have to do any raking in my yard.
That's right. We don't have to rake. We don't have to, all that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Get my kids out there picking weeds every once in a while, and I'm good to go.
That's right.
You watch the Bucs game this weekend?
I did a little bit. Again, Sunday's hard. I'm usually taking a little nap or something, but they played that late game, so that's nicer. That 4:30 game, and boy, Tampa's doing good. I don't have my college team's not doing so good. So
we don't have to talk about that.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about that, but Tampa Bay looking pretty good. Baker's really playing well.
You think he's an MVP candidate?
That's what they say. I don't, I don't know enough about all the NFL players. Followed it quite like I do college, but he has certainly really come into his own in Tampa. Mm-hmm. I actually talked to a Cleveland Brown fan the other day, and they're like, "Man, how do we let that guy get away?" And he's doing great, and the Bucs are playing well. Hopefully, they can keep it going.
I love it. Well, Pastor, I think I just wanted to catch up with you a little bit today, see how you're doing. And there's a term that I've heard kind of floating around. It's been floating around for a few years. Church I was at before, we talked about it a lot, and I hear it here in Calvary in our circles as well. And I don't know for our listeners if they've heard it, but I want to help just define if they do hear it in the next few weeks or whatever. But it's this term third wayism.
Yep.
Within the church. Can you help? Let's define that really quick, and then I'd like to kind of
and for anybody listening in, I don't pretend to be the expert. I haven't read all the books that have been written about it and so forth. But essentially, I think we can help people understand what is being. You see this quite a bit in social media debates. There's again a well-known Southern Baptist pastor published a book recently, and so it kind of has brought that conversation back up. And it is a really important conversation to have because it goes to the idea of how do we respond culturally and politically in this moment in which we lived. And we have talked about that quite a bit. But third wayism, as I understand it, was primarily associated with Tim Keller. I don't know if he coined the term or used it, but it was really became prominent because Tim Keller, who was a very prominent, he passed away recently, but a very prominent pastor in probably the first 2 decades of this century in New York City, Presbyterian pastor, and really became, for about a 10, 15-year period, kind of maybe one of the most popular models of pastoral ministry, a guy people look to, and a guy some of our SBC leaders also really look to. And I'll be honest, a guy I look to. He was intellectual, so it appealed to the people who wanted to, whether we're intellectuals or not, the idea that he was, a well-written, well-read, kind of was able to reason with people. So as you go into this post-Christian era, it was like a model of ministry of how to engage people intellectually. He ministered in a blue city, New York, so it was committed to evangelism and seemed to not erode in terms of his convictions on basic Christian doctrines, basic even moral viewpoints. At least that was the perception, and I think it's mostly true. So he was seen as a model of orthodoxy and evangelism and biblical faithfulness in a radically post-Christian culture and in a very radically non-Christian area. So pastors around the country really look to Tim Keller. I've got a number of his books, and some of them are quite good. Third wayism was something he talked about, I think, quite a bit, and was seen to personify, and it was basically this. Instead of engaging the culture through a partisan way of on the right or the left, there's a third way. It's not the Republican way or the Democratic way. It's not the conservative way or the liberal way. There's a third way. And that way is not necessarily the middle between 2 points. That's what some people might think, the middle between 2 points. Sometimes that's the way it's been communicated. But not so much a middle point between two extremes, but rather a different way, a Jesus way, a biblical way, a Christian way. And it was a kind of a strategy to appear nonpartisan, which, as you can imagine, in the early 2000s in New York City, it seemed to be very effective and a way to gain a hearing and not turn people off. Not the Republican church, not the Democratic church, just a third way, the Jesus way. So it appealed to a lot of young leaders, including leaders that I would respect. And again, I have to say, even it influenced me. It also is important, I think, to observe it came kind of after the religious right. And there was a sense in the 80s and 90s that you had this religious right movement that, was epitomized by like the moral majority and some of those religious conservative movements. There was a sense in the early 2000s that had run its course and that maybe it had failed. Why? Because the culture now was really moving to the left, culturally, morally. They were antagonized by those kinds of positions. So, A, it didn't look like it had worked. And B, people who wanted to reach the culture, wanted to reach our friends and neighbors who aren't in church, were saying, you can't come across like the loud, angry old man shouting, get off my lawn. It's not going to work. We have to have these conversations with people who are in a different philosophical worldview space than we are in. And Tim Keller seemed like the perfect model on how to do that really well. But what you have seen now over the last 4 to 5 years is a lot of now, some of that's boomeranging. And we can get into that, but what you're seeing is a lot of critique of the third way movement and where it fell short and how we need a much more robust strategy for engaging culture and politics in America today.
Well, I appreciate you. I think Tim Keller even has coined in saying, Christianity is not right or left. And that's kind of where
that's third wayism.
Yeah, that's third wayism. I think even Truett Cathy said, I'm not left wing, I'm not right wing, I'm the whole chicken. And it's an interesting way to think about it as well. Yeah. And so what you're saying, it sounds positive. It sounds like, okay, like trying to meet people in the middle. But and it seemed to have worked for a season. But I can see just sitting in our seats, you can kind of get numb to a few things as well. And you feel like that's how it's gone, or where do you think we're at right now?
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the quotes that were very, very popular, and I've used them myself. I want to be honest. I used them myself. Maybe because I don't know that I was consciously being influenced by third wayism, but it was in the water. And it was in the water in terms of even convention leaders that I have to say were probably influencing me. And, there was rhetoric like Tony Evans would say, God doesn't ride on the backs of donkeys or elephants. It was always an applause line. I'm sure I've used it. I don't recall where, but you use that in a meeting or a conference, you get amens. God doesn't ride on the backs of donkeys or elephants. I didn't know the Truett Cathy. It doesn't surprise me he goes to the chicken line. But Rick Warren, I think, at one point said, I'm not for the left wing or the right wing. I'm for the whole bird. It's kind of a funny line. And then he even had a meme earlier this year where he even said, like, Jesus was crucified between two thieves, and the idea was not the right or the left, Jesus somewhere kind of in the middle, which got roundly skewered. And he kind of walked it back. Recently, at an SBC convention, a speaker may have said, God is not on the right or the left, but God is something like overall and Lord of all, or something like that. Overall, above all, and Lord of all, something, little rhetorical thing. That was mine. That was mine. I said that in my SBC convention sermon 2021. And here's what I've said. And I actually gave a speech earlier this year, and we have a little clip that our team has got. We may post that. I don't know if we'll post it connection to this, but we're going to post it on social media a little bit. Because it was a speech that I gave earlier this year about how to engage the culture politically, and it really kind of gave me an opportunity to express some of my thoughts, some of which I also expressed here at Calvary in the lead up to the election last fall. Some people will remember that. How do we engage this cultural political moment? Here's what I say about the right-left language. Is it true? On one level, of course, it is true. And what do we mean? Well, God isn't defined by ever-changing political categories. God doesn't belong to the Republicans or the Democrats. God isn't riding the backs of donkeys or elephants. Yes, that is all true. And because conservative, liberal, those labels change. Give it 20 years, they mean different things to different people, and different people draw different conclusions from those kinds of things. So no political party gets to cage Jesus. He's above all. He's Lord of all. But what I said in the speech, and again, we have this clip that maybe we'll post at some point. I gave this speech. I said, it's also, I use this metaphor. I don't know if it's a good one. I said, it's also true that sunscreen prevents sunburn. Okay, that's a true statement. But if you're handing it out in a snowstorm or a blizzard, okay, something's off. Mm-hmm. Like, you're either something is wrong upstairs, you don't know what's going on, or you're maybe trying to deceive people. Because in a blizzard, that's not the need of the moment. Nobody is like, wow, it's a blizzard, we better watch out for sunscreen or sunburn, right? Maybe that's not a great illustration, but to me, it gets at it, because we are in a cultural moment where the issue is, right or left. Okay, that's true, but there's another issue happening. And that is, we are dealing now not just with political opinions about tax policy or the tax rates or the appropriate immigration numbers. We are dealing now in so much of political life with weighty questions that are absolutely moral issues. Mm-hmm. And on those issues, it's not about right and left. It's about right and wrong. Mm-hmm. And God is most certainly on one side and another. So when you say something like God's on the right or the left, you make it sound like God is neutral on the pressing cultural, political issues of the day. And I have said it at Calvary, so I'll say it here. I mean, on issues like, is abortion justified? The killing of unborn human life. Does God have an opinion on that? Yes. On the issues in the sexual revolution, does God have an opinion about sexual immorality? Yes. On issues of transgenderism, does God weigh in on that? Yes. Christian moral truth speaks to those issues in a transcendent way. And where your party may happen to stand is almost irrelevant to the sense of what is right or wrong. Mm-hmm. And in our culture, we just have to even go further, and let's just be honest and not hint around. The Democratic Party, the political left, has staked out positions on those issues that are completely incompatible with a Christian worldview. That isn't about being partisan. That's just about, let's be honest. When the Democratic candidate in the election last year said, my number one domestic priority is going to be to protect abortion up to the time of birth, the right to have an abortion up to the time of birth. That's my quote, number one domestic priority. Okay, that's a right or wrong issue. It's not a right or left issue. It's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's just a right or wrong issue. And pretending that it's not that clear cut is not doing anyone a service. We're being dishonest and disingenuous. That doesn't mean the other party is perfect. That doesn't mean the other party doesn't have problems. I don't want to be a partisan handmaid. I want to be able to tell Republicans or Democrats they need to repent. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that I think politics is the answer to all the problems that ail us. But there are issues that are right, wrong issues, and if you have a Christian worldview, you're going to come down on one side and not the other. Mm-hmm. That's just a Christian worldview issue. So the problem with the third way movement is that it leaves the impression, and I think a lot of third wayers would go, no, that's not what we were saying. Okay, maybe not, but it's time to clarify what you are saying. Because I think the impression of the third way movement is that both these sides are equally flawed. And that is not true. I mean, again, I'm not saying either side is perfect or either side, doesn't have problems. There are problems with every candidate, with every side. I get that. Jesus is above all of that. He doesn't wear a Republican hat, a Democrat hat. He's the Lord. He doesn't put any hat on or any uniform on. I just want to know who is kneeling at his throne and willing to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Who accepts, even if they're not kneeling at his throne personally, who accepts Christian truth as truth, a Christian worldview as the right thing to do as opposed to the wrong thing to do. That's what I've got to take a look at. And so third wayism almost implied that right and left in this political environment are equally flawed. That's not true. It's not even close to being true. And you're not being honest if you say it is true. They're not equally at fault here. That's the first problem. And then the second problem, I would argue, is it effectively silenced the voice of Bible-believing convictional Christians at a time that the culture needed our voice the most. We were being taught that in order to be evangelistically, missionally effective, we needed to be quiet about these divisive cultural and political issues. And the problem with that is it did not work. It actually served the opposite purpose. There was no prophetic voice out there in the culture. And then we've talked about Charlie Kirk quite a bit over the last few weeks because of the terrible assassination. The Charlie Kirk legacy is that third wayism isn't the most effective way to engage this culture. Whatever problems people might have with a position Charlie Kirk may or may not have taken on a given issue or may not have said on a particular podcast, that's really, you're missing the point. I can take any person, right, left, in between, and find some things where I go, I didn't like the way they said that. I didn't like the way they did that. The legacy of Charlie Kirk was, I'm going to engage these ideological issues in America that have political implications head on. I'm not going to tiptoe around them. I'm not going to wait till later to talk about them. I'm going to lead with them sometimes. I'm charging in to the fight. And that's going to give me an opportunity to share the gospel. And he did, and it worked in the sense that I think Charlie Kirk, I posted this recently. I don't know, you can't call it a tweet anymore, right? It's a post.
Okay, yeah.
But probably preached the gospel in 31 years to more people than most preachers will in 31 lifetimes. And I think that's true. And I think it at least causes us to have to reflect on third wayism and say, you know, it really didn't work. It might have been a helpful idea in a moment, in a place, in a time, but we have to understand the times. And right now, our nation and our culture needs us to be able to articulate truth on some of the most pressing issues of the day. And the mission field right now might be to our right in many ways. That is, people who are seeing the madness of the culture and want to know, does anyone have truth? And I want to witness to everybody, right or left. I'm not saying we avoid anyone. But I think the field right unto harvest might be on the political right, where people have seen the madness of the culture. They've seen the madness of the sexual revolution. They've seen the party tell them to not believe their own eyes, that men can't compete in women's sports. And they're going, that doesn't make any sense. So I know these people are whacked out. You know, they're obviously, that is just crazy. So now, do you have any truth? And if you are afraid to speak into those issues, even sometimes to lead with those issues, you're going to lose an audience. And I think that's what happened for a lot of evangelical churches. And I think that's why a lot of people are critiquing the third way movement and saying we need a better way than just talking about a third way movement where we avoid partisanship and therefore, in the name of that, avoid hot-button cultural issues that people are begging us to address.
You've talked a lot on the podcast, and we've talked a lot as a staff about Aaron Wren's philosophy on
negative world.
World. And we came from neutral world into negative world. Do you think this idea of third wayism, that's kind of almost, I would say, lulled some people to sleep in Babylon almost?
Yep.
Do you think that kind of
I think it plays into it. Aaron
yeah.
Wren is an author who put, I think, like a sociologist or by trade. But anyway, he wrote a book called Negative World, and again, we've talked about it, you know, arguing simply that there was a period of time in America where we were in positive world. Then there was a period of time we were in neutral world, and now we're in negative world.
Toward Christian.
Yeah. And the way to understand this is there was a period of time where if your next door neighbor was an unbeliever and he knew that you were a Bible-believing Christian going to Calvary Baptist Church, it was probably a positive. Like, oh, good. Like he's looking for a house. Oh, good. They're Christian people. I'm going to, even if I'm not, it's positive. Like, they like Billy Graham and all that. And, you know, they're nice people. That's a good thing to believe in, even if I don't believe in it. Neutral world was like, I don't know. Everybody's got to do their own thing. It's neither positive or negative, but, as long as they're nice about it, I'll be nice about it. It's not, it's not a positive. It's just kind of like everybody's got to do their own thing. It's a neutral. And then negative world is, I don't know that I want to live next to somebody that believes the Bible and goes to church. Like, it's a negative. We entered negative world. Ren says when the Obergefell decision came down, legalizing gay marriage, we crossed a Rubicon. We entered negative world. And I do think that the third way strategy that Keller employed and used in the early 2000s probably began to fail as an adequate way to talk about cultural engagement as we entered negative world. I absolutely do. It collapsed because however you wanted to design it and articulate it, the practical effect was, I can tell you that I'm down here on the front lines. Like, I'm not a sociologist, writer, podcaster. I mean, I know we got a podcast, but I'm a pastor. I can tell you down here on the front lines, the practical effect of third wayism is you are supposed to shut up and not talk about cultural issues. That's the practical effect. And don't tell me it wasn't, because I've heard from plenty of people that's exactly what they did. You can't talk about the controversial issues. You get them, the idea was we got to get them in the church, we got to win them to Christ, and then we can talk about those other things later on. And I'm telling you, it left us with an inadequate philosophy for how to engage the culture. And a lot of pastors kind of hid behind the bushes and didn't engage that. Dan, we've seen people over the last several weeks, probably at your campus. I can tell you, almost every week I'm running into somebody who's visiting Calvary, and it's only been a month since the Charlie Kirk assassination, and they're saying to me, the reason we're here is because our church didn't address it at all. I don't think a week has gone by that I haven't talked to somebody who said that. Now, we've had people leave here. Not many, but we've had a few leave here saying, in fact, one person I was told, I didn't read it, posted, I'm going to another church where they don't talk about it. Well, I hope not. I hope that church will talk about it, and maybe that person's just been there 3 weeks and they hadn't talked about it or something. I sure hope they will. But if you're not addressing these issues, you're not, I would argue, faithfully preaching the whole truth of the gospel, because you're not dealing with the ideologies and the strongholds of this culture and Paul talks about demolishing the strongholds. You're not dealing with the strongholds in people's lives. So you have to lead with this sometimes. As you teach through Scripture, as we saw recently in our teaching through 1 Thessalonians, which we're teaching through here at Calvary, and as we saw there in the early part of chapter 4, you cannot hold on to Jesus and hold on to sexual immorality at the same time. It was the first issue of sanctification Paul addressed. He said, I hope for you sanctification. Therefore, flee sexual immorality. Right? I mean, it was like out of the gate. He didn't avoid the issue. Like, he wasn't tiptoeing around the issue. It was one of the things he came out. You say, yeah, well, he was addressing people who were already Christians. True. Obviously, it was a letter to the church. But it is clear when you read in Acts 17 that Paul walks into a culture awash with idolatry and immorality, and he did address the issue. It talks about how they left their idols and they turned to Christ. You don't think he didn't address the issues head on about what it meant to follow Jesus? Of course he did. So we have to be willing to address those issues. And I think the failure of third wayism is it effectively silenced so many Christian leaders in churches who simply said, oh, we just preach the gospel. We just preach the gospel. And I wish I could say it didn't influence me, but I think it did, because at some point I thought, oh, that makes sense. To be missionally effective, I don't want to lead with something that's offensive, and I don't think I ever bought into it completely, because we were never silent about those issues around here in the LGBTQ movement. We never were, as you know. But I think it may have softened the way we talked about some of that in ways that I now, in this moment, go, no, we got to be bold, courageous, convictional. So that's the problem with third wayism, in my judgment.
With that being said, I think what we could end up seeing, though, and I think it could be just as dangerous if it's not done correctly, is a drift towards just preaching moralism over everything.
Of course.
And
yep.
Can you see that going that way?
Yeah,
as
and
well?
it's a fair criticism.
Yeah.
Look, we've got to be careful. Any movement, as you begin to step into a movement or a theme or this, I'm going to just can have a kind of carnal application if you aren't grounded in the gospel and grounded in the scripture and grounded in the mission. We are not simply called to preach moralism. As we know, people can forsake certain immoral behavior. They're still lost without Christ. And sometimes they trade one politically incorrect immoral behavior for one that seems more immoral behavior. Like we've talked about the barstool conservatism. It comes out of the barstool sports guys, and they have sports podcasts and all that. Well, it's kind of been this conservative reaction to the liberal LGBTQ movement. But what are they? I don't know these guys. I don't listen to podcasts.
I wouldn't recommend listening to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. You probably.
Yeah.
But I'm not accusing them because I haven't watched this particular podcast. But that lane can be misogynistic, can be very sexualized. All of a sudden, hey, we're not LGBTQ, so let's have women in bikinis and all in coarse talk and ugly things to say. No, that's not the way. So the problem with politics is, and I think at its best, Keller was trying to say, you're not going to find the solution on the right or the left. You find the solution in Jesus, and that is true. So, again, I have a lot of respect for the ministry of Tim Keller, even though I think in this environment, we look at that strategy and go, okay, we need to look at it again, particularly in the way a lot of people have applied it. And everybody needs to be corrected. I need to be corrected. I've been corrected on a lot of things. We've talked about some of it here. So, hey, everybody is... correction is just part of what God's word does. We're forever reforming. And so you're exactly right. We don't want to just over here become moralistic and then pugilistic in our tone without talking about the real source of everyone's problem is that you are a sinner, fallen, separated from God. You need God to forgive you and save you. And if you're running over here with a highly sexualized kind of conservatism, that's not God-honoring. If you're over here in the deception of left-wing sexual life, that's not Christ-honoring. The answer is Jesus. In that sense, yes, I don't now, I don't want to call it the third way because that kind of has a tinge to it, but there is the Jesus way, the Jesus way. And the Jesus way is he defines truth. Truth isn't defined by the Republicans. It's not defined by the Democrats. It isn't right or left. That is truth. That's how we should understand that statement. The Jesus way is above all of that. And I think that's what I was trying to say in 2021. It's certainly what I would say now. The Jesus way is above that. But what we have to understand is when we do speak into this cultural moment, and we should not be afraid of saying the Jesus way says this is right and this is wrong. And if that sounds partisan to you, tough. Get over it. If you got a problem with that because it's political, maybe politics is your problem, not mine. And because to me, it's truth, whether it's Republican, Democrat, whatever. What does Jesus say? What is right? That's where we need to stand. And yes, we do need to be gospel-centered. I'll speak. The problem with the gospel-centered became another euphemism for this third way. So let me critique that for a moment. It sounds so good, gospel-centered. But what it ended up doing inadvertently is gospel caging. It kind of like said, okay, you can talk about these couple of things related to the gospel, but don't apply it to all these issues out here. It almost caged the gospel. It almost put it in a corner and said, hey, if you're a pastor preaching on Sunday morning, you can talk about the gospel, as they define it, as someone defines it, but you can't now carry the implications of that gospel into people's lives and talk about issues if they happen to be controversial or partisan. So in the name of gospel-centeredness, you actually kind of cage the gospel almost, instead of saying, hey, the gospel applies to every area of life. It applies to our money. It applies to our sexuality. It applies to how we treat other people. The gospel applies to everything. So you don't put me in a corner and say, well, you got, you can only talk about this. No, the Bible talks about everything that pertains to human conduct. And we do need to preach the truth. So I don't want to just preach moralism, but you know what moralism or the law does? You know, because you've read the New Testament, you've read Galatians. When you preach the law, it brings conviction, right? And when there's conviction, they're ready for grace. So I heard years ago somebody say, law to the proud, grace to the humble. And what he meant was, if you come across somebody that's proud and defiant, and we all know where that kind of, those words, but it happens on all sides, but we kind of know who lives to wave the banner of pride. When you talk to someone who's proud, defiant, I'm not wrong, the law is what breaks that pride. The moral truth of God can break that pride. So you do have to be willing to talk about it. And then when there's humility and there's brokenness and there's the sinner wanting grace, that's when we come in with a message of grace. Isn't it good to know that regardless of what your sin is, there is a God that does love you and will forgive you because Christ died. And obviously, we want to get from law to grace as quickly as we can when we're preaching, right? Because we're gospel preachers. But I think sometimes I don't want to be moralistic. We haven't preached the law, and we haven't preached God's truth that sometimes is needed to bring the conviction that then opens someone to the gospel. So it's another way of looking at the flaw of this lack of engaging the culture and this lack of dealing with moral issues. In a way, we didn't preach the moral truth of God, and therefore there wasn't this wide audience for the grace of God, because I would argue during the last 20 years, you haven't seen a greater Christian influence. You've seen a lessening of Christian influence. But when you look at what may be happening now, we see a lot of people starting to wake up, and all of a sudden you're seeing, I read this week, Bible sales are rocketing. Church attendance is rocketing. Churches everywhere. We just, a few weeks ago, baptized more in one day than ever a single day in the history of our church. And we've had some good days, but that was a good one. That was an even better one. So we're seeing this openness now. And so praise God for it. But I think we're always thinking, how do we engage the culture well? And third wayism may have emphasized certain things in the moment that were helpful, maybe, but there are also certain things that need to be critiqued now. And I think we need a kind of better way to talk about. We're not avoiding issues just because they're partisan. We're not avoiding issues just because they have political implications. We don't want to be political animals, political partisans, but we want to deal with those issues because there is a right and wrong about so many of these issues.
That's good, Pastor. I love how you kind of started that off, too, is this idea. I mean, Gospel Center Church, I read it. I know you've read it. I mean, it was a textbook I was required to read in school and read the other ones with it as well. And you kind of mentioned it was Gospel Center, but we need to spread it out. It's kind of from going Gospel Center to Gospel saturated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where we need to go.
We need gospel saturated. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I don't know if did you just coin that? Son, I'm telling you, that's the book right there. Gospel saturated. Of course, we're grounded in the gospel. But we get to the gospel. The Old Testament's in our Bible for a reason. The Old Testament's in the Bible for a reason. And we need the law of God. We need the transcendent moral truth of God. That's part of the gospel message, that we can come in then and present the gospel. One of the flaws people have said is, well, Jesus was so kind to people who are sexual sinners, like the woman caught in adultery or the Samaritan woman and others that we can talk about. And he was harsh when he dealt with religious Pharisees. And the application point of that became, hey, when we deal with, moralism, religious moralism, they're the Pharisees. We need to be harsh. And to the people out there, and we were kind of looking to the left culturally, caught in sexual sin, that's like the woman at the well. But actually, and I think we've talked about this already, we may have had it backwards, because the people who are most like Pharisees today are actually people who are on that left side of the LGBTQ sexual revolution. They have a God, they have a morality, and it doesn't have to be in the LGBTQ alphabet. It can just be the promiscuity party, right? They don't have a letter. We need a letter put in there for them because they're part of that whole thing. Honestly, heterosexual promiscuity is kind of what gave ground to all this other stuff. So we need maybe put something before the L. We need another one. Promiscuity. But all of that is where people got proud. Don't call me out on that. They're the proud Pharisees.
Mm-hmm. And
if you look on the other side, the people in the culture who are going, wait a second, there is such brokenness in the world. Look at what they're doing to my children in the public school. Look at what is being done, and they're going, that's just crazy. And they're looking at the church. Do you have any truth, or did you cave like every other institution? Mm-hmm. Did you cave like everybody else? And sadly, many churches have. Many churches are just absolutely apostate. They're not going to get any message that's different from MSNBC talking points or anything else. They want to know. They're not looking for Fox News talking points, but let me tell you what they're looking for. They're looking for a church that will hold that Bible up and tell people this is the way. Walk in it. He is the way. So it's not the third way. It's the way, the Jesus way. Mm-hmm. That's maybe what we need to come up with a better cultural engagement moniker, the Jesus way, the way, mm-hmm. The way of truth. We need gospel saturation, not just gospel-centeredness.
I like that.
I like it. I'm telling you, we're going to go with it.
Yeah, I like
going with it.
Well, Pastor, I think it's a great conversation. And
it's a very important conversation.
That's what I was going to say. It's very important. I know a lot of our people from Calvary that they may not have heard it yet, but it is coming. It's a lot. It's surrounding. You probably haven't even realized you're in a conversation about third wayism or about gospel-centered church, and it's just an interesting take on it because at the top level, you're like, this sounds right, but then you really look at the world around us, and you're like, we're missing it.
There's a piece missing, and I want to say to the people who I know, I have dear friends, and mm-hmm. Because they read, the books of Keller, they're like me. They are of a certain age, and you walk through that season, and you adopted third way language with the best of motives. They weren't trying to sell out. These are not people, many of them, maybe some, but not the ones I know. They weren't trying to sell out anything. Mm-hmm. They really wanted to engage their culture, and they truly love people, right? We love people. We want to engage the culture. So we adopted this as, hey, this is the way that we can communicate the gospel and to a culture without being unnecessarily offensive and gaining an audience. And again, it seemed right for a time, and there may be much to it that was appropriate for a time. But we have to understand what is happening culturally, and that the world in which we live now is not looking for neutrality. They are not looking for leaders who lack a spine and are afraid to deal with these issues. I really believe what people need today are leaders and churches and Christians who are unashamed of their convictions, not because of arrogance or, again, a pugnacious, kind of disputatious nature. No. We are people of the truth. Mm-hmm. We're people of the truth. And we have to be able to, with conviction, clarity, and boldness, articulate that truth without compromise in order to have those gospel conversations that we want.
Last thing, I could do this with you for 4 hours, but I know we got things to do. But I think, right now we're talking, as pastors, we sit there, we have these conversations from the pulpit, we're talking about it, and we're kind of living it. But as always, I think of Joe in the third row, the guy that's coming to church saying, I hear you. Okay, give me 3 things that Joe in the third row can do to kind of just be that gospel-saturated individual in their workplace.
Well, don't be ashamed of the gospel comes to mind. Romans 1:6, don't be ashamed of the gospel. If for whatever reason you have felt like, hey, because the political winds were blowing one direction, maybe I wasn't ashamed, but I'm going to be a little quieter because I don't want to be offensive. I don't want you to be offensive. An offensive person goes out of their way to stir up conflict and really wants to win arguments, not people. I don't want to win arguments. I want to win people. Mm-hmm. He that winneth arguments is wise. The scripture never says that. It does say, King James Version, he that winneth souls is wise. So, first of all, don't be ashamed of the gospel. Don't be ashamed to stand up and say, this is what I believe about the gospel, and don't be ashamed of the implications of the gospel in areas of morality or controversial areas. So first of all, do not be ashamed. You may lose friends if you follow Jesus, but it's worth it to follow Jesus. I'm just going to tell you, it's worth it to follow Jesus. And so I would say, don't be ashamed. You need to steel your convictional spine. We need Christians that will not waffle and wobble now in the cultural moment. Speak the truth, always with love, but be willing to speak the truth. Understand it's going to come at a cost in this culture. You may lose friends, family members. I mean, we've seen families where people, I'm not coming over your house anymore if you do that, if you vote that way, if you believe that. Well, how sad is that? But you can't be held hostage by that. You've got to, with love, but with courage and consistency, articulate the truth. And it's going to cost you some friends now. I mean, God is separating the wheat from the chaff. I'm telling you, he's separating the wheat from the chaff. And it's painful, but you got to let him do it. So I would just say, don't be ashamed of the gospel. Be courageous, but always remember, people are not our enemies, right? They're not our enemies. Even the people who act like your enemies or who make you mad, you know, if they get you mad, you've lost. If you get mad in a debate, you've lost almost always. So don't view them as enemies. View them as people that God loves and that, you know what? The truth can set anybody free. And we have people right here at our church, people in your church, all of us are sinners. But we've got some people who are mired in sexual sin for many, many years. But they're happy today that this church told them the truth. I guarantee you there's some people, and, you know, someday we need to have our buddy William Allen maybe on here for the podcast.
He's asked me a couple times.
We need to have him on sometime. We should do that. But I guarantee you my buddy William would say, I'm awful glad this church was willing to talk about some things. 30 years of transgender, living as a woman, 30 years. A great story, but God saved him. That's the great part of the story. God saved him, and he's awful glad that he came to this church and we spoke the truth. We didn't try to, you know, be ugly or unkind, but we were willing to speak the truth. And he didn't convert overnight. It wasn't the first time, but as he heard the gospel, God began to use it to change his heart. There are going to be so many people like that. So if we lose some people because, hey, we're afraid to do that, I see people like William and I go, you know what? It's worth it. It's worth it. We're gonna keep speaking the truth because Jesus can save anybody.
I love that. Well, Pastor, I appreciate you. Appreciate your time. I've been praying for you, praying for everything we're doing here at Calvary. A lot of fun stuff coming up. We have the 25th anniversary of the school coming up. We'll probably do a podcast on that in a few weeks.
Couple of weeks coming, big deal, and we'll do that in a couple of weeks. It's coming the end of the month, and football games on Friday night.
Let's go.
By the way, the weather's good.
Football weather.
It's the football team is good. Florida State, not so good. Not so good, those guys.
Go Bucks.
Yeah, we're talking the Miami Hurricanes, they're happy. But all the Seminole Gator fans, we're all just crying together in the corner. But Calvary's doing pretty good. So come on Wednesday night. We'll have a great time, and great time to be at Calvary. A couple more weeks in the First Thessalonians series. The fall festival's coming up that we do at a couple of our campuses. So great time. Website always has all that stuff. And look forward to seeing everybody very soon.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you joining us for the Ricecast this week. We're praying for you often. Know that you are loved. And if you need anything, please feel free to reach out in the comments, and we will talk to you next week here on the Ricecast. Have a good one.